The grand ballroom of the Riverside Hotel sparkled with golden light from its signature crystal chandeliers, each fixture casting intricate patterns across the marble floors that had hosted countless celebrations for the city's most prominent families. My parents had transformed the elegant space into something worthy of a royal gala for their 30th wedding anniversary, with cascading white roses and golden accents that spoke of both success and refined taste. I sat quietly at the family table near the raised platform where a 12-piece orchestra played sophisticated melodies that floated through conversations filled with the confident laughter of the city's elite. The guest list represented the pinnacle of our metropolitan area's success. Prominent business leaders, influential politicians, respected physicians, and philanthropists whose names graced buildings throughout the region. Mom commanded attention at the center of the room, absolutely luminous in her custom-designed silver gown that probably cost more than most people's annual salaries. At 54, Victoria Thompson still possessed the kind of elegance that made other wealthy women seek her fashion advice. And tonight, surrounded by congratulations from 200 of her closest friends, she was glowing with the satisfaction that comes from a life perfectly orchestrated. Dad stood beside her like a distinguished statesman, his silver hair impeccably styled and his custom tuxedo fitting him with the precision that only comes from decades of success. At 56, William Thompson commanded respect as one of the region's most successful investment bankers, his firm managing portfolios for some of the wealthiest families in 3 states. His achievements were evident in everything from his platinum cufflinks to the way other powerful men sought his counsel on financial matters. My older brother Christopher dominated the conversation at our table, his voice carrying the confidence that comes from being groomed as the heir to a financial empire. At 29, he had just been promoted to senior vice president at Dad's firm, and his success was evident in everything from his Patek Philippe watch to the way younger professionals gravitated toward his opinions on market trends. The Henderson portfolio alone generated $18 million in fees this quarter, Christopher was saying, adjusting his custom cufflinks with practiced casualness. Sometimes I look at what we've accomplished and realize that most people simply don't understand what it takes to operate at this level of financial sophistication. His wife Patricia nodded enthusiastically, elegant in her emerald silk dress that showcased the lifestyle that Christopher's position provided. It's so important to maintain professional standards. The Thompson name represents excellence in financial services, and Christopher is expanding that legacy in ways that even exceed what William built. I continued eating my perfectly prepared beef Wellington, letting their familiar conversation about investment strategies and wealth management wash over me like expensive background music. They had no idea that the simple black evening gown I was wearing had been designed by the same fashion house that dressed tech billionaires and hedge fund managers, or that the understated diamond necklace around my throat was worth more than Christopher's annual salary. Speaking of maintaining standards and family legacy, Mom's voice took on the authoritative tone she used when she wanted to make important announcements. I think this anniversary celebration is the perfect time to discuss what it means to uphold the Thompson family reputation. The conversations around us quieted as Mom's commanding voice drew attention from across the elegant ballroom. Her words carried the weight of someone who had spent 3 decades building social connections and who expected her children to honor that tradition of excellence. When William and I married 30 years ago, Mom continued, her tone taking on the practiced cadence of someone accustomed to addressing charity galas and social committees, we made a commitment not just to each other, but to building something meaningful that our children could be proud of, something that would establish the Thompson name as synonymous with success and social responsibility. Dad beamed at her with genuine affection, his pride in their shared achievements evident in his expression. Their success was legendary in social circles. 2 people who had built complementary careers that served their community while accumulating the kind of wealth that enabled significant philanthropy. Looking at Christopher, Mom went on, her voice carrying clearly across the ballroom, I see that legacy being honored and expanded. He's not just following William's path, he's innovating our approach to wealth management and preparing to take Thompson Financial to even greater heights. Christopher straightened in his chair, clearly basking in the public acknowledgement of his achievements. Patricia squeezed his hand, her expression radiating the satisfaction that comes from being married to the family's acknowledged golden child. Then Mom's gaze found me across the crowded ballroom, and I felt the familiar weight of her disappointment settling over the celebration like an expensive but suffocating cloud. And then there's Amanda, she said, her tone shifting subtly but unmistakably, the warmth draining from her voice like champagne from a cracked glass. My youngest daughter, who at 27 continues to embarrass this family with her complete lack of direction and her refusal to pursue any meaningful contribution to society. The words cut through the elegant atmosphere like a blade through silk, sharp and impossible to ignore. I could feel 200 pairs of eyes turning toward me, some sympathetic, others curious, a few probably grateful that their own family disappointments weren't being aired quite so publicly at such a prestigious event. Amanda graduated from Stanford with honors, Mom continued, her voice carrying the frustration that comes from watching potential go unfulfilled, but she refuses to pursue graduate school, refuses to join any established profession, and insists on working on what she calls social projects that contribute nothing to either her own success or this family's reputation. Dad leaned forward, assuming his role as the family's practical advisor and financial expert. We've offered her every opportunity, positions at the firm, connections with the best graduate programs in the country, introductions to suitable young professionals who could help guide her toward a meaningful career path. Instead, Christopher chimed in, his voice carrying the condescending tone that successful older siblings perfect through years of being the favored child, she insists on living in that rundown apartment downtown, working with homeless people and drug addicts, essentially throwing away every advantage we've provided her. Patricia nodded sympathetically, though I caught the flash of satisfaction in her expression. It's so difficult when family members refuse to take advantage of the opportunities they've been given. Some people just don't have the ambition for real achievement. I could feel the attention of nearby tables, other guests probably wondering why this celebration of marital success was taking such a pointed turn toward family dysfunction and disappointment. Mom stood up slightly, apparently deciding that this was the perfect moment to make her disappointment a centerpiece of the evening's entertainment. "You're an embarrassment to this family," she declared, her voice carrying across the ballroom with the authority that made her one of the city's most respected society matrons. The words hung in the air like expensive perfume, overwhelming, suffocating, and impossible to ignore. I could see the shock and sympathy on the faces of Mom's friends, the way they looked at me with the kind of pity usually reserved for charity cases. "Look at yourself," Mom continued, apparently encouraged by the dramatic effect her words were having on the distinguished audience. 27 years old, living in poverty by choice, wasting your education and your family connections on people who will never contribute anything meaningful to society. Dad nodded gravely, his expression mixing paternal authority with what he probably thought was tough love. "We've supported this phase long enough, Amanda. It's time to grow up and take responsibility for building a real life instead of playing social worker with society's failures." That's when my phone buzzed. The sound was subtle, but in the sudden quiet that had fallen over our section of the ballroom, it seemed amplified. I glanced at the screen and saw a name that made my heart skip. Mayor Davidson. "I'm so sorry," I whispered, starting to decline the call. "I should take this outside." No, Mom said, her voice carrying a note of frustrated amusement that was clearly audible to the surrounding tables. "By all means, take your call. Let's all see what's so important that it can't wait until after your parents' 30th anniversary celebration." The challenge in her voice was unmistakable, and I realized this was another test, another opportunity for her to prove her point about my lack of professionalism and social awareness in front of 200 of the city's most influential people. I looked at my phone, then at the expectant faces around me, and made a decision that would change everything. "Actually, you're right," I said, answering the call and immediately putting it on speaker. "Hello, this is Amanda Thompson." "Amanda." Mayor Davidson's voice boomed through the ballroom's acoustics, warm and enthusiastic. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything important, but I couldn't wait until tomorrow to personally thank you for the most generous donation our city has ever received." The room went dead silent. 200 of the city's most prominent citizens stared at my phone as if it were broadcasting from another dimension. "Thank you for the $50 million donation, Ms. Thompson," the mayor continued, his voice carrying clearly across the stunned ballroom. "The new Children's Hospital wing will serve thousands of families, and the homeless services center you funded will literally save lives. I've never seen philanthropy on this scale from someone so young." I could see Mom's face going pale as the implications began to sink in. Dad's champagne glass froze halfway to his lips. Christopher's mouth fell open mid-chew. Patricia's eyes were fixed on my phone as if it might explode. "I'm honored to help," I replied calmly, though my heart was racing. "The Children's Hospital has been needed for years, and the Homeless Services Center will provide comprehensive support instead of just temporary shelter." $50 million, the mayor repeated, his voice carrying the kind of reverence that politicians reserve for their largest donors. "And I understand from the foundation paperwork that this represents just the first phase of your plan giving. The education initiative and the mental health programs you've outlined could transform our entire social services infrastructure." The silence in the ballroom was so complete that I could hear the distant sound of traffic outside, the soft whisper of expensive fabric as people shifted in their seats, the barely audible hum of the hotel's climate control system. "Amanda," the mayor continued, apparently oblivious to the dramatic impact his words were having on my family, "I also wanted to confirm that you'll be joining us for the groundbreaking ceremony next month. The press is very interested in interviewing the youngest major philanthropist in the city's history." I glanced around the table at my family's stunned expressions. "Of course, Mayor Davidson. I'm looking forward to seeing the project begin." "Excellent. And Amanda, thank you again for choosing to invest in our community rather than in flashy projects that generate publicity but don't solve real problems. Your foundation's approach to systemic change is exactly what we need." After I ended the call, the silence stretched on for what felt like hours but was probably only seconds. I could hear someone's sharp intake of breath, the soft clinking of crystal glasses being set down on tables, the distant sound of the orchestra continuing to play as if nothing world-changing had just occurred. $50 million, Dad whispered, as if saying the number aloud would somehow make it more real. I stood up slowly, smoothing down my simple black gown, the same dress Mom had criticized as evidence of my lack of sophistication and success. "The Thompson Foundation," I said calmly, addressing my family directly, "focuses on systemic solutions to poverty, homelessness, and lack of access to healthcare. We've committed $230 million over the next 5 years to projects that address root causes rather than just symptoms." Christopher was staring at me like I was a complete stranger. $230 million? How do you have that kind of money? "I founded 3 companies during college," I explained. 2 software firms and a medical device company. I sold them for a combined total of $470 million, then invested the proceeds in real estate and emerging technologies. The portfolio is currently worth about $800 million. The number hung in the air like a revelation. $800 million. More wealth than most of the people in this room would accumulate in their lifetimes, and I'd earned it while they assumed I was wasting my potential on charity work. Mom found her voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. "You're worth $800 million? The foundation manages that amount," I clarified. "I live on about $60,000 a year. Everything else goes toward solving problems that government funding can't address adequately." Patricia leaned forward, her earlier condescension completely gone. "You founded 3 companies while you were in college?" "I started with an app that helped students find study groups, then developed software for managing nonprofit organizations, then created a medical device that monitors vital signs remotely," I explained. Each company addressed a real problem that I'd experienced personally. Dad finally managed to close his mouth, though his eyes remained wide with disbelief. "Amanda, why didn't you tell us? Why did you let us think you were throwing your life away?" "Because every time I tried to explain what I was building, you interrupted to tell me why I should join Christopher at the firm or pursue an MBA or marry someone who could guide my career properly," I replied honestly. "When I mentioned working with homeless populations, you said it was dangerous and pointless. When I talked about systemic solutions to poverty, you told me that charity was fine as a hobby but not as a life's work." I pulled out my phone and showed them the foundation's website, which detailed our programs and impact metrics. After a while, I decided to let my results speak for themselves. The conversations throughout the ballroom had resumed, but with a decidedly different energy. People were approaching our table, introducing themselves and asking about the foundation's work. I found myself surrounded by business cards from people who wanted to support our initiatives. Mrs. Wellington from the hospital board extended her hand with obvious respect. "Ms. Thompson, I had no idea you were behind the Children's Hospital expansion. That project will transform pediatric care in our region." Dr. Morrison from the medical center was right behind her. The Homeless Services Center, your funding will fill a gap that we've struggled with for years. Would you consider expanding the mental health components? But the conversation that mattered most came when Mom pulled me aside as the evening was winding down. Amanda, she said quietly, her voice carrying none of the authority that had dominated the earlier part of the evening, I owe you an apology. More than an apology. I've been completely wrong about what you've accomplished and what matters in life. I know, I replied, giving her a hug that felt long overdue. But maybe now we can start over. As people who both want to make a difference, just in different ways. Christopher joined us, his earlier arrogance replaced by something that looked like genuine admiration. Amanda, I have to ask, would you consider letting me help with the foundation's investment management? Because what you've built is exactly the kind of meaningful work I've been wanting to be part of. Of course, I said, pulling out my business card. Though you should know that foundation board members are expected to contribute their time without compensation. We put every dollar toward programs, not administration. Christopher took the card with obvious relief. That sounds perfect. I think I have a lot to learn about what real success actually means. As the celebration wound down and guests began to leave, many of them stopped to ask about volunteer opportunities and partnership possibilities with the foundation. Several major donors expressed interest in collaborating on future projects. But the moment that mattered most came when Dad stood up to make a final toast. Ladies and gentlemen, he announced, his voice carrying across the ballroom one last time, I need to make a correction to something that was said earlier tonight. The room quieted, all attention focused on the man who had dominated the financial sector for decades but was now learning that success comes in many forms. My wife called our daughter Amanda an embarrassment to this family, Dad continued, his voice strong despite the emotion I could see in his eyes. She was wrong. Amanda isn't our embarrassment, she's our inspiration. While we've been building wealth, she's been building hope. He raised his glass toward me, his expression carrying both pride and a humility I'd never seen from him before. To Amanda Thompson, philanthropist and founder of the Thompson Foundation, and the daughter who taught her parents that the greatest legacy isn't what you accumulate but what you give away. The applause that followed was thunderous, and as I stood to acknowledge it, I realized that sometimes the best revenge isn't proving people wrong about your limitations. Sometimes it's showing them that love and purpose can transform any family, even when it takes a mayor's phone call to get their attention. The next morning, 15 nonprofits called to discuss partnerships with the Thompson Foundation. Mom and Dad volunteered to help me review the proposals.